Welcome to Mad Max Fury Road Crammed. This is the 2015 George Miller reignition of a post-apocalyptic Australian wasteland saga. Let's go! Former road warrior Max and his trauma-induced madness are forever running from his past, and also a sudden raiding party in a dog-eat-dog nightmare world with a heavy scrap heap challenge aesthetic. Reduced down to nothing more than the instinct of survival, Max pops a break for it while constantly confronted by the dead that he failed to protect. But as well as taking his gas and ride, it looks like these guys also plan on taking his blood, because this is no small gang, but the organized Half-Life war boys of the Mesa Citadel, led by their deified redeemer, Immorten Joe, an irradiated and sickly warlord leader who controls the desperate population by holding an iron grip on their access to clean water. In this world, every journey is a dangerous one, so his most trusted general, Imperator Furiosa, is sent out with an armed escort for a supply run to Gastown to bring back petrol and bullets in her big rig. But it seems that something is cooking, as halfway she goes off-road for a new heading, confusing the war boys, who ultimately assume they're on some ulterior need-to-know mission. Joe, however, has a sudden panic attack at the site and heads over to his vault to discover that his prized property is missing, 5 hot wives acting as his least deformed breeders, and rouses his whole V8 army in response, who spend their downtime transfusing blood to stay ahead of their wasteland cancers. And this guy Nux, despite being mid-treatment, refuses to miss the party, strapping his blood bag Max to the front of his ride. So while the convoy assumes they're acting under orders, the rest of Immorten Joe's army are now hunting after them to get his livestock back, and he's even sending out flares to summon his neighboring allies. Furiosa in the meantime has crossed into the scavenger territory of the Russian buzzards that have set spiky traps for the unwary and try their luck at setting up a rolling chop shop. But the war boys live for a glorious death in battle to be reborn eternal and blow the spiky scavengers to smithereens with the help of Nux and his gunner, who nitrous blasted ahead of the main army in glorious fervor after getting directly looked at by his god leader. But just as all the boys get wise to her betrayal, she heads them into a rolling sandstorm where Max gets free enough to ditch some dead weight, and as the other trailing war boys get nudged across the event horizon of calamitous tornadoes to be sucked up into explosive oblivion, Nux floods his own ride for a pyrotechnic suicide run, only to have his flare snatched by Max, who would much rather not, before getting smashed apart themselves as everyone succumbs to the sheer weight of the storm. Once the worst has passed, however, Max awakens to realize he would very much like to no longer be chained to a nutcase, but for now has to make do as he heads up to the distant big rig that's getting cleaned out while the gorgeous escaped wives of Immorten Joe, who are almost one of every flavor, take a water break and free themselves from their former chastisements. As a man of few words, Max grunts his way into slaking his thirst whilst holding everyone up with a gun that doesn't work, and this essentially saves his life as Furiosa gets the drop on him with only one arm and tries to blow his brains out the top of his head. Nux comes to, and suddenly it's the chained pair versus 5 hotties and a warrior general as they scramble for purchase and a gun magazine before Max finds himself back on top. Nux is overjoyed that he and his blood bag got Joe's property back, as now the two of them will be able to ask for anything as reward, but he's disappointed to discover that Max really isn't feeling the effects of their team building exercise, who tries to steal the rig for himself, only to discover it's got a kill switch sequence that requires Furiosa to work it. So it looks like they're all gonna have to get along for a bit, even if Max is making sure he's holding on to all the guns, because now the combined forces of Immorten Joe and his summon aid of the mayor of Gastown and the major of the bullet farm are all in hot pursuit as they make for the mountains. And although Nux snuck back on to try to take over the cab, the hot wives restrain him for a quick re-education on the difference between a machine god afterlife versus just following a maniac tyrant before kicking him off the ride. Looks like Furiosa had planned to free Joe's wives well in advance, as she's made a deal with the mountain's dirt bike rock riders for safe passage and sealing the pass in return for a pod of fuel. But they're pretty pissed at her for bringing 3 whole war parties into the situation, which really sours the handover. So it's back to making a run for it while Immorten Joe's monster car climbs the blown past that the rest of the warbands are gonna have to clear away, taking Nux along for being the most tenacious of his boys so far. Meanwhile, the bikers harry the rig with high-jumping explosive attack runs, but Max and Furiosa work their way through the bag of guns to keep them at bay, losing the petrol pod in a big explosion and escaping the mountain territory. But Joe is hard on their heels with his son Rictus, whose size is only offset by his IQ, and who needs reminding not to use his flamer because they want the wives back unbarbecued, as they are Immorten's unharmable treasures. So our boy, seeing another chance at a solo run for glory, gets Joe's own gun and a promise of the afterlife before being tossed like a dwarf, only to instantly screw it up and receive the worst possible damnation of being called mediocre. Then it's a Gorkamorka grappling hook that ruins the power steering, but Angarad, the most pregnant and favorite of his wives, cuts the chain to save the day. Whoa, watch out! Oh, thank God she's okay. And ends up slipping in her own blood to fall to her doom, despite Joe flipping his own ride in an attempt to avoid her. The remaining wives are distraught, but Furiosa ultimately recognizes the need to keep moving as Joe cries out in anguish under a machine gun lament. The youngest wife, Fragile, is starting to get cold feet about visiting the mythical green place and starts thinking a return to slavery might be a safer option before Furiosa picks off the nearest tail. And while Catwoman takes stock of the remaining guns, the redhead wife Capable heads back as a rear lookout, only to find their emotionally broken stowaway still riding along with them, crushed by the loss of both Angarad and his own chances of religious immortality. Capable, in her kind nature, ends up consoling what she recognizes as being just another lost soul, and ultimately keeps quiet about their passenger. While later that day for night, the desert starts to get treacherous with swampy footing, and Joe's allies are starting to get pretty moody about the high cost of their venture. The mayor of Gastown has been keeping a tally, but the major of the bullet farm is sporting tank treads and strikes ahead of the party with a searchlight through the murky darkness and a dash of dangerous gunfire that's concerning everyone. So Furiosa plays it cool with an on-point sniper shot that ends up blinding the major, who, to his credit, just really leans into his new blind justice look with a pair of machine guns and a whole lot of manic energy. But thanks in part to their war boy, the team managed to clear the rig out into firmer footing, and it looks like something old has started to reawaken in Max after all of their fun so far, because his instincts of running to survive have started to get pushed aside for the sake of retaliation, to blow their pursuers and return with their fresh looted supplies along with a new steering wheel. And so through the night they cross a swampland darkness where, oh Jesus, through to a new day where they finally reach Furiosa's birthplace from before she was stolen as a child, where they come across a naked lady up in a tower.
That's bait.
So Furiosa calls out to her old tribe, who quickly drop the damsel act and come out to greet her. A band of desert biking, mostly grandmas, who are glad to welcome her home after almost 20 years, delighting in the fresh youth of her companions. But the childhood dream of her green paradise is shattered when she learns it became a poisoned swamp, the very one in fact they had driven right through last night in the dark. And this band are the only remaining survivors from a better time. In an irradiated wasteland, it seems the grass is always greener on the other side, and the nanas are planning to load up their bikes with 160 days of fuel and cross the salt flats in the hope of reaching a better life on the other side. But Max is a man who knows what running away does to you, and that's no way to live. So he stops the new convoy to suggest instead they go back the way they came and take over the very citadel they escaped from, speaking to Furiosa's need for redemption. And so back in their war rig, that's exactly what they do, catching all of the petrol heads with their pants down in a run for the undefended citadel. And the wild combat continues as the war boys juice up the tank of Max's own car for a little mouth-to-mouth pace racing, with the rifle support of their new friends who slip back among the pursuing host to sow havoc, and who even after getting downed don't hesitate to make every shot count, despite some bulletproof glass and a fatal follow-up up from the mayor of Gastown in his own tanker setup. The rest of the warband try to harpoon their whale into submission, nearly taking chunks out of everyone, but Max thinks fast to cut them free under gunfire before the acrobatic boarding party of the pole boys dip in and snatch up Catwoman, as the whole thing becomes a petrol and carnage situation, with wave after wave of fighters dropping in to disable the rig and chainsaw the grandmas, while Max fights his way across the top and tries to keep the cab free from harm within inches of everyone's lives, resulting in a grab save from Furiosa that leaves her open to a terrible blow. Max manages though to commandeer the mayor's rig and gets a little toasted before Furiosa obliterates them, and he's then inducted into a little pole-to-pole mid-air combat before the Gastown rig explodes and the entire party returns to the mountain pass for some more smashing, all under the furious metal riffs of their irradiated guitar herald. But with her wound, Furiosa is struggling, and Max fights his way back up across the pursuit team to take center stage for a brief battle of the bands, while Fragile seems to make another play back into bondage by getting Rictus to rescue her out, but this time it's been a trick to help Furiosa and Catwoman to take over Immorten's own car and bring the fight to him, whilst Max and Rictus duke it out. And finally facing their fears and climbing across with grim determination, Furiosa gives Immorten Joe a harpoon sandwich that tears off half his face. And Dag, the formerly most cynical of the wives, carries on an old woman's dream of planting a better future. They're now almost all across to Joe's lead car, announcing the death of everyone's god leader, but Rictus tears out a part of the war rig engine to destroy them all, and so Nux, the war boy, witnessed by Capable and the others, dies gloriously for a cause he can really get behind, blocking the pass off from the rest of the remaining pursuit, freeing them at last. Oh my god. And so, after Max tends to Furiosa's wound, they roll back home to present the dead remains of Immorten Joe, much to the roaring approval of the enslaved population, who announce Furiosa as their new leader. And with no better options, the young Warlings, along with Joe's other son, accept all the ladies up, where they open the floodgates to the clean water to make the best of the world that they already know. And Max, ever wondering and yet a little returned to his former self, gives them one last nod before disappearing into the crowd. So drop a like and let me know what you thought about having Mad Max Fury Road crammed inside of you. Subscribe if you thought this video was any good, and I'll see you next time. Take care.